Before being decommissioned in the late 90s, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington was the longest-serving vessel of her kind. Today, the Lexington is permanently moored at Corpus Christi, Texas, a museum ship serving to remind each generation of the sacrifices of those who served aboard the vessel known as the Blue Ghost. Come with me on a trek to walk the decks and corridors of the Lady Lex. When an older aircraft carrier named Lexington was sunk during the Battle of the Coral Sea, the newly built CV-16 was given the same name as the sunken vessel. She sailed into the Pacific in 1943 to take the fight to the Japanese Navy. Some of the exhibits aboard the Lexington today are dedicated to the men serving in that enemy Navy. We see a rising sun flag, signed by kamikaze pilots before takeoff as part of their own funeral rituals. We see pieces of Japanese aircraft that struck the Lexington during kamikaze attacks. We also see evidence of the ship's ability to fight back, her tally of enemies sunk or shot down. The Lex was the target of so many attacks so often that the Japanese repeatedly reported her as sunk, only to come across her again. To the Japanese, this provided her with a simple nickname, the Blue Ghost. To those who served aboard her, the Lexington was a home as well as a warship. Moving through the Lexington is to move through narrow corridors and steep stairwells and finding, around every corner, evidence of the everyday life aboard the Lex. A barber shop. A post office. A dentist office. A chapel. A machinist shop. The sick bay. The mess. Then through yet another hatch, an example of the crew's berthing. Thin mattresses on bunks that resemble nothing so much as industrial shelving. Junior officers fared only a bit better. But the commanding officer, the captain of the Lexington, lived in far better style. The captain's cabin might be a bit cramped when compared to living standards ashore, but aboard the Lex, his quarters were nothing but luxurious, including a private galley. One never forgets that the old vessel was anything but a ship of war. Today, her anti-aircraft guns might crawl with entranced children, but they are nevertheless a reminder of her deadly purpose. You see that purpose aboard the cavernous hangar deck, which once housed planes that launched against Japanese targets in the fight for the Pacific. You see it on the bridge, where eagle-eyed officers directed the daily operations of the Lex as she went into battle, and where the captain would have sat, overlooking the flight deck and the launch of fighter and bomber aircraft into combat. Over 40 years, those aircraft have changed dramatically, represented by the vast array of examples on the Lexington's flight deck today. Propeller planes of the Second World War, next to the first-generation jet aircraft of the Korean conflict, and the more modern fighters and reconnaissance craft of the Vietnam War and beyond. The pilots of those aircraft were assembled for mission briefings here, in one of the Lex's many ready rooms. The operations of those craft would have been directed from the Combat Information Center, or CIC, located deep within the ship, protected from shell fire. Dive deeper within the Lex, and you'll find her engine rooms. As you stand here by the controls that direct the massive machinery of the ship, you are under the waterline, in compartments where the temperature hovered as high as 120 degrees. As you maneuver through the Lexington on various tours, you become aware of how much of the ship must be empty. Empty passageways, closed hatches, quarters 2 decades and more vacant. There's a ghost-like quality, perhaps inevitable in a ship known as the Blue Ghost. Stories abound of guests meeting a tour guide named Charlie, dressed as a sailor, who gives the most engaging and detailed tours of the ship before vanishing through a hatchway. It would surprise me if Charlie were the only ghost aboard a vessel with such a long and storied history. As one of the only ships of her time still left afloat, the Lexington is, herself, a shade of the past. This would not have surprised her Japanese hunters during World War II. In fact, something tells me they would have found it appropriate for a vessel they knew as the Blue Ghost.